for a really long time. When you're writing in Google Docs and you say,
Yeah.
I want to, and then it'll suggest that
Gmail.
it finishes the rest of the sentence. You hit tab and it fills it in, right?
Yeah.
It's just doing that, but with way more tokens, and then a lot of other random features like this.
That's why it kind of feels like a natural evolution to me. Like the
it does.
Gmail app right now, if I say my address is and hit space, it goes, oh, I know what you're about to write. And it says, if you just want to take that address like you usually do, just swipe over, hit tab, it appears. And like, so the skill is just knowing like how to trigger that and how to type and have that save you a little bit of time. And I guess now it's like, okay, autocomplete was just me going, press the first, you know how you'll write your first word and then just hit the middle autocomplete word and it just makes a sentence based on what it thinks.
Yeah,
that's just
Markov
because
chain.
it's trained off of you typing a lot.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit more advanced than that.
Maybe I'm just a boomer and I'm a little concerned about this, but like I just thanks. I don't know. I worry about a day where everything is completely written by AI and it removes every single ounce of individualism from our writing to the point where like any email, I know that you don't care when you get an email that's like very, very businessy.
80% of my emails are templates anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Like all the PR emails we get PR emails that say, hello, journalist, or like, hello, YouTuber. And obviously they didn't even go in and do the work of filling that in their templates. But like, I'm concerned about a day where you're like, tell Michael I can't make it to his birthday party. And then it writes this long thing like, I'm so sorry, I've got a thing that's going on. And it's like, and it's, I don't know. It's it concerns me a little bit, but this is like controversial topic and I'm a boomer. So
I don't think you need to worry because soon AI will be able to tell your tone and your characteristics and then it'll be able to write that in a very
that's literally
David way.
A Black Mirror episode where like the woman's husband dies and they download all his text messages and then they put him in a data-based robot.
Here's maybe my hot take version of what you were talking about, which is like if you just write something and it just works, you just hit send. The question of like writing an essay for school, if you put in the prompt into ChatGPT and it spits out an essay and it's like a C- essay and you just hit send, you deserve a C- because the prompt that you decided to give it and your knowledge of how to use the tools gave that, and you're deciding to not proofread it, you deserve a C-, not an F, because the goal of assigning you an essay is to see how good of a response can you give to the prompt. And that's the response you give, given your tools. And that's it. That's what's going to happen in real life. When you get a job in the real world, they're going to be like, write an essay on this, theoretically, and you're going to give them the C- thing, and you deserve a C-, not an F. But if you get really good at designing prompts for AI, hear me out, you get really good at getting certain words into ChatGPT and it kicks out just the right essay, and then you proofread it a little bit and send that in, and it's an A+ essay, you deserve an A+ because you did that work to create that thing, given the tools
I completely agree.
I think it's a skill.
I think that's dependent on the thing you're trying to learn in school. If you're trying to be a doctor and have to write an essay about
That's
how
fair.
to save somebody's
There are
life,
so many
you shouldn't
angles
have
of
to
this.
take the
If
time
it's-
when someone's dying in
There's
front
so
of
many
you to
angles
look at
of this.
ChatGPT.
Okay, so that's a great point.
If you have to learn things to memory to future help on the job site thinking, then that you should fail.
Like if it's write a history essay about why this monument was important for this piece of history and time, maybe you don't need to memorize all those facts. But if you go back and fact check and make sure your essay's good, you are going through the learning process a little bit. But if it's like write an essay about why this type of surgery is better, and then you're doing that to become a doctor and do that surgery, that ChatGPT thing is not a skill you need to be a good doctor. You should actually use the skills to be a doctor to get the doctor degree.
Right.
It's a
Like,
very specific.
Something I thought about is like when these generative AI can start doing computer science and coding for people, which they can. And there's all these tools that have been popping up in the last couple of years, like no code, where it can just like create websites for you, create code for you. The problem there is that if everyone grows up not having to learn the fundamentals of things and they just are able to use these tools to make stuff, there becomes a limit of how much you can actually build out from there. Or if you have a problem, how do you diagnose it? It's
You mean like photography?
what?
I feel like people don't really know how photography
They just
works,
hit a
but they
button.
just hit a button on their phone and they have pictures.
Well, yeah, but photography, it's like a photo. You can do a cool photo, but like you're not
Like communication.
transforming. You're not creating the future of photography by taking pictures. Like in computer science, if you're like building new tools or building new architectures or whatever, you still have to understand how the architecture works.
No, but
Because
I mean,
there's
there will always be people that will do that. Like you are a photographer.
Yeah.
But everyone can take a picture. There's going to be a time where everyone can write code, but there will be engineers that know how to write code.
I would hope so. I just don't want us to get to the point where in elementary school and university, it's like, click these buttons and then everything's done for you.
And that's how you get an essay, kids. I think I think kind of like what you're saying, there's always, there has to be the general use of a thing and then the behind the scenes knowledge of how it works thing. And for most people, in most cases, when you drive a car down the highway, you don't have to know how the car works. You just use the tool.
Yeah.
And when you take a photo with your phone, you don't have to know how it works. You just got a photo. But there will always be some group of people that is, I am actually interested in how this works. I want to get behind the scenes and build the things. Yeah. Then you have to learn those things. You don't get to just use the tool. You actually learn the things.
That's true.
And so this is just one more tool that a lot of people are just going to use for normal things.
Yeah.
And then some fraction of them will be like, I want to get these tools to be better. I'm going to learn how they work. And then that's the other group.
I suppose it's an aspect of democratization, right? Where like many more people can build things that you would normally need to code for, but the people that want to make new stuff still have to be the ones that understand the fundamentals. It's just there's a much wider swath of people that are able to create stuff.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go for it.
I was gonna say that's how I felt when you were mentioning how like it can do things in Excel or can do things in Slide, where you might have an Excel expert or designer. I see it more as it will make the average person who's maybe creating the concept of what you need that sheet for or that slide for can create it. And then when it gets into the professional aspect, it's like this person in Excel can do this 1,000 times faster and do all of it. And then, or this designer, when we need to make slides for presentation, can see my vision and make it into a real thing.
Right.
It almost feels, I just had this thought while you were saying it. It's like ChatGPT is when you call the help desk at any place, it's the first person you talk to that's reading off of a script and telling you all the things on a script. And then the experts are the expedited ticket that like you've made it through all of the steps and they can't help you. And now there's an actual expert sitting there that is like, oh yeah, I've dealt with this 100 times before. Like, let me walk you through it.
I think the difference is that we're getting to the point where ChatGPT has dealt with this 100 times before it can walk you through it. That's the question. It's like
that's the question if it does happen. I don't know if we're there yet.
Well, I'm not saying AGI. I'm just saying that like, I mean, especially with
it's like maybe someday.
Like we're getting there quickly.
Yeah,
is what I'm saying.
I think the closer we get, the harder and the farther we'll get. If that makes sense. The closer we get, there's so much harder. Those last parts, the last parts of getting to the actual human level is going to be so hard that gap is going to exist forever. Probably.
It's like cars. A little.
Oh man.
Sorry, I love the analogy, but I'm like, everyone knows how to drive a car in the basic form of turn it on, foot on the gas and steering wheel. Mm-hmm. And if you ask somebody right now to like build a car, it's just like there is a giant gap between people who know how to use a car and know how to make the car better, build the car. Is that what you mean?
I was going to say, I think it works better with a lot of people can drive a car, but watch autonomous driving, how long that's been going on. And it's so much better than it was, but it is so far away from an actual human driving.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. I think a lot of the Google changes do feel like a more natural evolution of what Google was already doing and not as much of a like stark contrast, leap away from what they were doing. And I think that is good and smart. And like we have talked about before, Google has everything to lose and other companies have everything to gain.
Thanks.
And so them doing that is probably a good move, especially since they like low key announced this, like they weren't making a big deal about it. Whereas whenever OpenAI releases something new, like OpenAI feels like the new Tesla or the new
same guy,
whatever, like they feel like the new Bell Labs. Like everything, whenever they do anything, the world pays attention, and that has only existed for the last like 6 months. Like it's insane how everyone is just like locking on to every little thing they do, whereas Google is being a lot more low key about all these things. I really want to try all these new Google features. I don't know when it's publicly launching, but it seems really interesting.
I can't wait to have it write emails for me. Cannot wait for that. I'm very
nervous.
excited.
I'm nervous. I just think it's going to be funny when you ask it to write long emails, and then everyone who receives the email is like, I'm not reading all that. Summarize that for me. And it's just like,
You go
within
through
the AI, it's just going like, woo, woo. It's
Yeah.
contracting and
I love how you were
compressing.
like, I'm so worried that people aren't going to feel like they're getting my personality in my email. And then
not
those
gonna
people are going to be like, summarize this.
Yeah.
I don't want his
Anyways,
full
yeah.
email.
Yeah.
Amazing.
is
Okay.
true.
Well, we've rambled at length about these.
Yeah.
Well, I think my summarization take is AI is a tool. That's the
For you, it's to cheat in college.
well, it's a useful tool. I didn't cheat in college when I was in college. I'll put it that
Have
way.
it. I
That's
wish
fair.
I had this.
I would have used so much ChatGPT.
Last little thing. OpenAI actually did announce GPT-4.
I'm using it now. That's the entire thing.
Yeah. Which was in Bing for a long time, and neither Microsoft nor OpenAI would say that it was in Bing, but
Really?
now everyone knows. But if you go on ChatGPT with GPT-4, it can now parse images, which is kind of a game changer in a lot of ways, because you can literally show it a meme and say, "Tell me why this is funny,"
Oh, yeah.
and it will tell you why it's funny.
I saw
Most
that.
boomer thing to do.
I thought that was
It's
cool because it
hilarious.
was like an iPhone charger that looked like a VGA cable. And it's like, this is funny because a VGA cable is a clunky old
Yeah.
piece of tech and
Yeah.
it's being plugged into an iPhone.
Yeah. And then someone at the New York Times took a photo of all the food in their fridge, and they said, "What can I make with all of this?" And it was like, well, you could use this thing that you have mixed with this thing to make this meal, which is pretty amazing.
So
Yo, now you're in. Now you're in.
Samsung refrigerators with ChatGPT, so I can look
You're at the
into
grocery
my
store.
smart.
What should I have for dinner tonight?
What do I need to make this based on what's in my refrigerator and what's
Yeah.
in this store
It's like
right
buy
now?
milk. Yeah.
Smart fridge. Alice is finally getting a smart fridge.
It also does way better on standardized tests.
I saw that. They literally wrote a chart
I
of
hate
like
that.
all the
That's-
standardized test scores.
Yeah,
It's
it can
crazy.
process way more text if you put a lot of text into it. And then it's already getting integrated into a ton of mainstream products. So over the last few months, probably since like Bing was released, they've been working with a number of different companies like Duolingo or that Carrot app that you were that you
Oh,
use
yeah.
for weather.
The weather app.
To integrate different chat assistants. Obviously, Duolingo already had like the owl chat assistant person thing. Not person, but owl.
Their name is Duo.
Duo.
It is.
And so now, obviously, all the chatbots that are already within these apps are just going to get better, which I think is amazing, right? I think it's great that you can have a more natural conversation with a chatbot that's already in an app. I don't think every app needs a chatbot, but the
Okay.
ones that already have them are going to get better, which is great.
Final question. What year of CES are we going to see the first refrigerator with a chatbot?
Next year.
Yeah,
Absolutely, 100% next
I
year.
think that's probably a lock.
I think we're all in on that
year.
one. Yeah,
CES 2024.
nice.
All right. Well, that's about it. We've talked at length for this episode about all these things, but of course, we need to get to the end, which is trivia answers.
Trivia. So, scores. Marquez has 8.
I'm falling behind.
Andrew has 7. David has 11. David in the lead. Okay. First question, then the music plays, and you have until the end of the music to write down your answer. So, we spoke about the watch buds, the Huawei ones. Before Google acquired Fitbit, Fitbit acquired Pebble after they had an impressive Kickstarter launch. What year did Pebble run their Kickstarter campaign? And the music begins.
Kickstarter. Oh, okay. I remember when I
Kickstarter.
had the watch, so I have to like rewind a little bit.
Not a lot of time for rewinding here.
I think I'm
You better
thinking
skip.
I'm thinking of the Pebble 2.
I'm gonna go
Not
with
the
that.
2. I thought the same
Man,
thing.
Because I
and had
remember
to-
the year
yeah.
the Pebble 2 came out.
I had to do a little more
I
Googling
might have
to
had
get the
the Pebble
original
too.
Kickstarter.
Guessing is so much faster.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right, flip them and read. What do you got?
Oh, wow.
Ooh,
Different
big
answers
range.
here. I have 2011.
2014.
2015.
You're both too late.
All wrong. The year was 2012.
Oh, that's what I erased.
I know, I saw.
Oh my god, I was so.
I did
He
have
wrote
that.
the correct answer down and then erased it.
I needed
Cool,
that point.
cool. Everything's fine.
I needed that point. This is a
All right.
multiple choice one.
This is the multiple choice one. All right. Another trivia question. Big smile. In 2007, a company called Polymer Vision released an e-reader with a rollable screen. In 2007, this device was called A. Hit it. The Readius. B. the roller reader? Or C, the Scrollio?
I'm torn. I'm kind of torn.
I'm torn because I know how good Ellis is at making up fake names.
Yeah.
Aw, you guys. All right, what do we got?
Well, I was torn between A and
sorry,
B, but
Howard C.
I picked.
Oh, sorry.
I was torn between A and B, but I picked A.
Let's go.
Nice.
Well, I didn't. I picked C.
I'm the Scrollio. I'm
Also
glad you
C.
guys liked Scrollio.
Scrollio sounds like an actual Silicon Valley product.
Yeah. I was trying to pick something that would be 2007 Silicon Valley. You know, so like Roller Reader may have been a Nook competitor. I don't know.
2007 was like kind of before Silicon Valley became Silicon Valley.
That's the
It was
first
iPhone.
Yeah.
Facebook existed.
Yeah. But it was like before the whole valley was like startups.
startup culture.
Yeah.
True.
Early.
Like I used to go there all the time and it was not like,
Really?
it
Yeah.
was not the way it is now.
But David, Xerox Park was there.
I was going to say, there needed to
Yeah,
be
but
an X in it if you wanted it to sound like 2007.
Yeah, some crazy spelling.
All right.
Thank you for watching and for listening. And of course, stay tuned till next week. We'll see you there. Peace.
Waveform is produced by Adam Molina and Ellis Rovin. We're partnered with Vox Media Podcast Network, and our intro-outro music is created by Vane Still. That's just going to be one singular word in like 2 years. It's like salt, pepper, ketchup.
User described the backrooms as a no clipping out of reality where something sinister lurks around one of the endless corridors. However, I think we can all agree that it wasn't until Kim Parsons began releasing his series of short films from January 2022 did Backrooms become the mainstream enigmatic legend it is today. If you watched my recent Skinamarink video, I mentioned wanting to review Backrooms because besides watching videos by Nexpo, Nick Crawley, Lizzie Masquerade, and Jacksepticeye, I'm genuinely new to the whole internet subgenre that is analog horror. That's of course, unless you count Silent Hill, Siren, or any pre-HD found footage film I've covered, that roots itself in the gritty surveillance home video aesthetic. Despite seeing regular requests to cover the Backrooms, the reason I put off ever looking into it was because of my disillusionment towards anything cool being put into the hands of the internet. It mainly stems from a video I made a few years back talking about the Slenderman phenomenon, which I guess you could say was the big internet horror juggernaut of my generation. After having identical origins as a mysterious 4chan post in 2009, it wasn't until around 2012 did Slenderman become an inescapable trend due to the 8 Pages game, which I believe paved the way for the compelling but oversaturation of short-form indie horror games with an inbuilt desire to generate free publicity from Let's Players and MatPat. By the way, that's not a cynical knock at every game, because if it wasn't for certain content creators, I would have missed some fun and ingenious creations. In fact, the only reason I ever heard of Backrooms was because of Let's Play recommendations. Anyway, the point I wanted to make was that, like with Slenderman and SCP and any public domain creation, for me personally, I find the more the internet involves itself in building lore, the less fascinating the whole thing became. Of course, don't get me wrong, I love the sense of community it builds, because at the end of the day, everyone is just tapping into their giddy fascination, and who am I to gatekeep something that clearly brings people joy? However, in terms of my personal interests, as the famous quote somewhat goes, things work a hell of a lot better when you don't explain them. At this point, if you agree or disagree with my feelings, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below, leave a cheeky wee like and subscribe for more videos like this, and before we dive deeper into the Backrooms, here are a few words from this video's sponsor, Grammarly. As someone who writes with a stream of consciousness delivery, one of my common fears is that my words either don't make sense, don't give off the right vibe, or there could simply be a much cleaner and efficient way of presenting them. That's where Grammarly comes in, this accessible digital writing assistant analyzes your writing style by going beyond traditional basic spelling and grammar functionality to provide you with genuine structural advice and help you adapt your writing to the specific tone of audience it's meant for. By using their website or installing their app, which for my iPad has a built-in switch for keyboards, Grammarly helps to not only better your productivity by proofreading and suggesting logical amendments, it also helps you to avoid misinterpretations in your tone, such as when writing hastily worded emails or letters when under pressure, thus improving your relationship with those you're working with instead of accidentally coming off as too harsh or even too passive. Grammarly Premium even specifically adjusts your wording to make your tone appear capable, confident, and assured, which is perfect for me when reinforcing certain arguments in my scripts. For example, I'm currently working on a comparison between the Last of Us HBO series and the game, so having what is effectively a second opinion that knows exactly what I'm looking for, thanks to the ability to set goals that define the intent, audience, and formality of my writing, means I can stop second-guessing myself, reflect on my words, and in turn improve my writing and communication skills overall. Whether it's Google Docs, Microsoft Word, or even just your own email, you can integrate Grammarly into your daily life today by going to grammarly.com/Ryan Hollinger to sign up for an account, and if you would like to level up your writing and tone, upgrade to Grammarly Premium for 20% off. I always struggle to fit in with these internet creations because since the internet thrives on short-lived instantaneous reactions, by the time I get to it, they're usually demystified by contrived overindulgent lore, which in the case of Slenderman went from this strange Lovecraftian child abductor to some teleporting time distortion mind control conspiracy. When the YouTube series Marble Hornets became the go-to mainline story, Slenderman just became boring and the whole mystique rapidly fell apart. It's the same problem with the Blair Witch sequel. Just give me an incomprehensible creepy entity and stop telling me how it works. I've said this dozens of times before, and Super Eyepatch Wolf long covered this when talking about Junji Ito. When you start explaining away ambiguity, you invite scrutiny because you're applying logic and rules that dictate our prior and future understanding of the thing. It's not to say explanation doesn't have its effect, but leaving some things a mystery sustains the allure of its legacy. For me, it's like being late to a house party only to find the house is burned down and everyone's moved the party down the street. Before I know it, the whole neighborhood is on fire and I'm left thinking, boy, I can't keep up with the original fun of these things, can I? I might be 29, but I'm not afraid to admit I'm a bit of a boomer when it comes to these internet trends, so in future, if you're going to request I cover the latest viral horror sensation, just know that I'm stuck in traffic from another millennium. Taking this into account, I went into the backrooms with an inherent bias where I felt it was going to start as a wonderfully simple idea, inevitably overburdened with forced-in lore to milk its virality for all it's worth. But after watching the first 16 videos currently in circulation at the time of recording this, all I can say is, I'm so sorry I ever doubted you. So, it was recently announced that A24 would be producing a feature film by Kane Parsons while he's on his summer vacation, that latter bit being such a dystopian sentence, which sounds like the perfect pairing for Backrooms to get the collaborative backing it needs to build beyond its origins without compromising its integrity for the sake of maximizing its commercial viability. However, in its current form, Backrooms doesn't really need to be condensed into a feature film, because the delivery of short segregated videos that gradually build upon the lore is strikingly effective in a way that wonderfully fits the format of internet sleuthing. Mainly, there's a clear and consistent narrative logic that's never oversold to the viewer. We're given just the right amount of information and intrigue about what's going on without utterly spoiling the main mystery of just what exactly the Backrooms is. The initial short film, set in 1996, takes on the Blair Witch effect of throwing us into the world without any context as a narrative camera operator no-clips out of reality into a space of infinite corridors, eventually bumping into this glitchy straw monster thing and soon falling back into reality. On its own, it's a powerful little short film. It's weird and ominous, with the setting eliciting this nauseatingly unnatural feel, with the abstract creature working thanks to a stark alien sound design. With a strong foundation in place, it would be easy to ruin it by jumping straight into explaining what we just saw, but Parsons was clever enough to put us in the shoes of researchers who are as equally perplexed by the backrooms as we are. As such, we learn about the world with the characters in real time, with subtle insinuations suggesting the researchers are also in the dark about certain dangerous specifics. Every video introduces a new haunting discovery thanks to a unique visual style that never feels cheap or inorganic. I appreciate Parsons' respect for the audience. It never tries to confuse you or force in motifs, red herrings, or cryptic visuals to give off the illusion it's some meticulous work of genius. Its intelligence comes purely from simplicity. Each short ends just as we hit a dramatic crescendo, making you hungry for more, only for each subsequent follow-up to take us either in a new direction or recontextualize what we just saw. After the 1996 short, we flash back to 1990, where each short slowly reveals the discovery of a portal leading to the backrooms, and eventually the unsurprising reality that the shadowy organization researching it, called Async, are essentially trying to commercialize it as an infinite storage unit for industry processing, office space, shops, and even residential. They're basically turning an alien portal into a never-ending mall without truly knowing what they're dealing with, which thematically is much more timely than simply another government agency using it for nefarious means. Adding ignorance to the human side of the story is a great way of maintaining the ambiguous alien nature of it, especially when early videos suggest the backrooms can infect its inhabitants with fatal fungal bacteria. It works on top of an unsettling detail lingering in the background that the more Async interferes with the backrooms, the more it bleeds into reality in the form of no-clipping, hence the increasing disappearances leading to moments straight out of As Above, So Below. Unlike Marble Hornets, it's not leading you through time-wasting contrivances it has no idea how to explain. Backrooms doesn't, well, back itself into a corner. It shows restraint not to overindulge and knows how to follow through with its narrative. You can definitely see this through its visual influences like Annihilation, where scientists enter this unknowingly Lovecraftian entity only to lose part of their humanity in the process, or Stephen King's The Mist, where after poking and prodding at something that's clearly dangerous, don't expect it to play nice when it decides to fight back. By the end of the current series of videos I was watching, I stopped viewing the backrooms as a place and started seeing it as an actual physical creature luring its prey in by mimicking our world. When we talk about the uncanny valley, we typically associate it to human features because that's where we generate most of our emotional responses. However, the backrooms, and by extension the rising interest in liminal spaces, can really bring to life the subject of the uncanny environment. If you've ever seen the found footage film The Borderlands, and I know you have because a lot of you request it, you'll know what I mean when I say watching the backrooms is like entering the belly of the beast. Now, if you're an existential person or just do really hard drugs, while the concept of liminal spaces has been around forever, its increasing influence on the horror genre cannot be understated, given how our relationship with the pandemic has made us reevaluate how we perceive isolation. What's scary about the backrooms isn't the idea of something chasing me, it's the tangible fear of just being alone. At its core premise, Backrooms is about humans being subjected to a soulless void where they're trapped with their own thoughts. One of the most outstanding videos is called Pitfalls, where a character falls down a hole and discovers an empty neighborhood. While the eventual nightmare chase is powerful in its own right, it's the palpable melancholy that settles in that truly elevates the scene.
That is not a person!
Besides the basic setup of The Mist, there are two Stephen King stories that better encapsulate what the Backrooms is like. The first is a short story called The Jaunt, where humanity has discovered instantaneous teleportation across the universe, but for the procedure to work, humans have to be sedated before jaunting, and the reason for this becomes clear after a father tells his kids about its harrowing history as the family await to be teleported for the first time. Spoilers for The Jaunt I highly recommend it. It's a harrowing short tale, but for those who want to know it, the story goes that a serial killer was offered a full pardon in exchange for jaunting without anesthetic, and instantaneously upon jaunting, they discover his hair has gone white, his eyes are peeled wide open, he's trembling, and simply tells them it's eternity in there before dropping dead. It's surmised that while jaunting is instant, for a conscious mind it feels agonizingly endless, with the story concluding with the father awakening to discover one of his children held their breath during anesthesia, now white-haired, twisting in pain, clawing at his eyes, screaming to his father, "Longer than you think, Dad, longer than you think." I mean, it certainly makes the Backrooms seem tame in comparison, but it's that complete terrifying subtraction of time and space that draws me back into the Backrooms. If it were to be explained, it would kill the impression of feeling like this insignificant, pointless rat in an experimental maze, kinda like the Cube when you think about it. Hell, since I like my Simpsons comparisons, it gave me the exact same feeling of sadness yet unflinching curiosity as that time Homer got trapped in an incomprehensible 3D realm. However, to put Backrooms into my brand of wild comparisons, it's like an MC Escher painting. It's a void of incomplete space, constantly and repetitiously distorting and reforming itself, shapeshifting what we cannot see with no regard to its subject, and the endless spiral they're going through. Philosophically, it plays off the idea that the only thing that exists is what's in front of your eyes. Behind you, everything simply ceases to be. It further plays into the creature itself. It has no true form, it's a theoretical glitch, akin to the premise of no clipping out of reality. In its simplest terms, it's the Matrix of haunted houses. Is it a real place, or just some sort of real-life version of lag? Are we beyond our current moment of existence and running to catch up with it? Or has somebody just laced my coffee with LSD? If you're still holding in there, don't worry, we're near the very end, but some of you have already worked out where I might be going with this. Going back to that other Stephen King comparison, have you ever seen or read The Langoliers? Okay, so you could say The Langoliers is spiritually similar to The Jaunt, in that it focuses on a group of passengers on a plane who awaken to discover humans have disappeared because the plane went through a rip in time, causing them to go into the past.
Why? Why was that done?
As such, the story sees the characters basically deal with their own existential problems while attempting to catch up with the present, as these weird ball munchers— wait, hold on, that's not the word I want to— I mean, it does describe them. These weird Lovecraftian creatures are devouring the past because reality can only exist in the moment. This thought came to mind because of one particular video that stood out to me called I Remember, which narrates a haunting poem about doubting existence, how everything is real until it's not, how the world folds within itself and tears itself apart, how one day nothing will remain except for the eternal ghost. It speaks to me that the Backrooms isn't so much a real place than it is a state of slow, fragmenting destruction, echoed by no clipping now infecting reality. What started as a simple, creepy, liminal image of void and emptiness has manifested into a world now eating itself alive, leaving us in a space worse than perpetual darkness. Because probably the only thought worse than realizing nothing is left is seeing something no longer exist. This video is sponsored by Raycon. Right, so over the last month or so, I imagine we've all been bombarded with advertising for Blumhouse's new schlock slasher bait Megan, an uncanny valley evil doll movie seemingly made for the TikTok generation that I respect doesn't even try to hide its campy conceit. I haven't seen it, but at the time of writing, now that it is released, I've heard great things about it wholeheartedly committing to its premise. However, I honestly have absolutely no desire to see it because evil doll movies are really not my cup of coffee. I typically try to avoid these types of movies when I can, yet ever since Annabelle exploded in popularity almost a decade ago, it's difficult to ignore the repeated attempts to reignite this niche 80s subgenre, which includes 2 competing attempts to reboot the series that practically started it all. Hell, somehow we have 5 of these Robert movies that keep popping up in my Netflix recommendations that just sort of exist without any fanfare. That said, my attention seems to be constantly drawn to a particular evil doll movie and its relatively recent sequel that has persistently pestered me every time I open the horror category on any rental store or discount sale. Maybe it's fate, maybe it's stubbornness, or maybe the release of Megan has made me morbidly curious to get it out of my head, but knowing full well of the boys' big hyped up WTF moment, which seems to be the word of mouth selling point for horror these days, I decided to finally give it my undivided attention to explore just why it seems to have retained an always there, nothing special home movie reputation. Perhaps it's purely a just me situation, but The Boy sits pretty firmly next to every other aggressively mediocre, modestly successful Conjuring Insidious spin-off about supernatural possession set in a big old empty house. You could argue its old school simplistic concept, which includes several wild twists and turns, does exemplify Hollywood polluting the genre with commercially accessible products manufactured solely around trends and tick boxes that ultimately dilute the horrifying potential buried deep within them. However, this point could be better exemplified through the film's director William Brent Bell, who has made a bit of a career out of conceptually interesting ideas that ultimately suffer from painfully unremarkable execution. He has a good eye for strong novel thumbnail and poster-friendly visuals that cater perfectly to the zeitgeist they're designed for, such as Separation, Where, The Devil Inside, and Stay Alive, about a cursed video game that I would love to cover but cannot obtain a legitimate copy anywhere in my country. In fact, he recently directed the Orphan prequel, which is right up his alley because it's an evil, creepy child concept with an utterly bonkers payoff similar to The Boy, and I've heard it's a prequel that is legitimately decent, so let me know in the comments if it's a topic that interests you. Anyway, now that I've established the backdrop, despite all the cynicism I've put across, please do bear in mind that it comes from a place of frustrated love, let's say, because as you'll see, The Boy has some insanely twisted potential. If you want to help me out, please leave a cheeky wee comment below with a side of like and subscribe, including your requests on what I should cover next. And lastly, here are a few words from this video sponsor, Raycon. New year, new years. Now that we've shaken off the rust, it's time to get back into our vibe-intensive routines with the help of Raycon's everyday earbuds, which look, feel, and sound better than ever. I've been wearing these bad boys all throughout the holidays thanks to their brilliant 3 distinct sound profiles that allow me to adapt to what I'm listening to. Maybe you're like me and trying to get back into the gym or sports, so switching to bass sound allows me to blast Muse in all their electrifying glory, while switching to pure sound is perfect for Sufjan Stevens' soulful vocals during leisurely walks, and then you have balanced sound, which is great for watching crap like my videos. Raycons offer 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life, and with optimized gel tips for that perfect in-ear fit, not only do they remain comfortable during extensive play, but they do not budge. Raycons also include noise isolation and awareness mode, which means you can use isolation to maintain immersion when listening or watching your favorite things, and use awareness mode to keep yourself safe when traveling or just when you need to chat to someone without disconnecting completely. However, best of all, Raycons give you all these quality features plus more at half the price of other premium audio brands, and with over 50,000 5-star reviews, maybe 2023 is the year you finally join the party. Simply click the link in the description box below or go to buyraycon.com/Ryan for 15% off your Raycon purchase, and let me know what you think.
Damn, he's fine. Damn, he's fine.
Dick.
The boy tells the story of Greta Evans, a forlorn young American lady who relocates to the UK to take on a nanny role on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire before they embark on a vacation for an undisclosed amount of time. The catch, however, is that the Heelshire's son Brahms is actually a porcelain doll who must be cared for in the exact same way you would an actual living child, with Greta having rules imposed upon her which she must strictly adhere to. Initially, the boy begins as an awkward, uncomfortable watch as Greta adjusts to the bewildering circumstances placed upon her, shrugging it off as an eccentric, senile elderly couple simply seeking comfort to fill the void in their lonely, isolated lives, a sentiment we gradually discover Greta can relate to. Your mind immediately begins to wonder what exactly is going on. Are the couple just a bit odd? Are they hiding something sinister? Is the doll haunted? Is this a Chucky situation and the doll's a manic serial killer? Oh hell, is this going to be some ritualistic murder cult conspiracy? Honestly, it does a good job keeping you compelled with the mystery, and you can kiss my ass if you think you knew where this was all going. After the Heelshires leave for their vacation visibly distraught and heartbroken, we do start to get a tragic understanding of their backstory in the form of the exposition-dumping love interest Malcolm, a local delivery driver who has stalked the Heelshire home for several years. Malcolm reveals that the real Brahms died 20 years ago on his 8th birthday during a house fire, and so his surviving doll has become a coping mechanism for the Heelshires, who have never overcome the grief of their son's death. It helps recontextualize the eerie atmosphere encompassing the Heelshire home. Suddenly, this cold, empty, creaky house becomes less haunting and more somber. There's a very frail quietness to the setting, like your interactions must be treated sensitively as to not disturb the delicate, troubled nature of the home's history. It's not exactly a unique atmosphere, and for the most part, I felt kind of bored and unaffected by its presentation, but it does project a sense of character that emotionally reflects upon Greta as we learn more about her own troubled backstory. As a side note, the limited on-screen time given to Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire shows how strong their performances are at conveying their strained efforts to hold back their anguish, with Mrs. Heelshire showing angst and frustration at Greta's difficulty engaging with the doll, and Mr. Heelshire completely contrasting my expectations with the fact he played Bishop Brennan in Father Ted.
If you ever try to bullshit me like that again, I will rip off your arms.
Greta and Malcolm, on the other hand, are just not as interesting. Malcolm is practically one note, but Rupert Evans still manages to make him somewhat charming, whereas Lauren Cohen's Greta doesn't convey much of anything besides the essentials of her character. I actually ended up comparing her to Jessie Buckley's screen presence and performance in Men, where all the quiet downtime and isolation need some emotional weight to sustain your attention, and Cohen doesn't really have it. To be fair, the doll is technically the star of the show, just broodingly sitting staring at Greta with some voyeuristic camera work to convey the impression she's always being watched, eyes on her all the time. The thing worth noting is that compared to other evil doll movies, I appreciate that Brahms aesthetically fits the setting instead of looking hideous for the sake of effect. It looks precisely like you'd expect a child like Brahms to own, thus grounding it in realism, especially when taking into account the tragic backstory he symbolizes. Frankly, I can't really add anything beyond, yes, he's creepy, he does his job, he randomly moves when Greta isn't looking, instilling the fear that he's alive or possessed, which is compounded by the strange creaks and childlike noises around the house and the nightmares Greta keeps experiencing. It's at the halfway point where I dreaded that this was all the movie would be, but to my surprise, it actually changes tone and redirects your expectations when it moves into psychological thriller territory when we finally get the full context of Greta's backstory. We learn that Greta escaped from America to distance herself from her abusive ex-boyfriend Cole, who's trying to track her down and ignoring his restraining order, adding to that feeling of oppression within the house as Greta is essentially in hiding. However, the real heartbreak is when we discover Greta had a miscarriage after being assaulted by Cole. Thus, she deeply empathizes with the Heelshire's despair, and her neglect for Brahms begins to feel less like a haunting and more like a purpose. After she begins following the strict rules to care for Brahms like he were real, assuming his spirit truly is within the doll, suddenly the hauntings begin to diminish, with Malcolm growing concerned at Greta's troubled behaviour. For Greta, she's making peace with her grief and reigniting meaning in her life after suffering stagnation from an abusive relationship that resulted in death. But from the outside looking in, we can see why Malcolm thinks Greta is growing unstable. I mean, everything we've experienced up to this point is purely from Greta's subjective and thus potentially unreliable point of view. This is why I'm surprised it paints such a compelling picture. It's not the most engaging watch, and it sure as hell isn't scary, but nonetheless, the mystery holds together long enough that it all unravels in the climax with intended effect. So, brace yourself. So the main problem I think the boy suffers from is more structural than pacing. It changes direction fairly abruptly without much anticipation. For example, there's a lot of waiting around for things to happen, and the time between the hauntings and Greta accepting the doll is possessed is fairly quick. This comes in hand with the unexpected arrival of her ex Cole, who we know is a monster, but he isn't around long enough to sell the distress he puts Greta under. Thus, his arrival doesn't hit the tense high note that it should. The other scene I think that's misplaced within the film is the deaths of Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire. It feels like this should be a significantly more tragic and surprising reveal, but it happens in between the hauntings and just doesn't align with the pace at that moment. The context of their deaths is that the Heelshires are attempting to pawn Brahms off to another carer so they can end their tormented misery. It actually comes from a place of guilt rather than grief when we finally understand just what the hell is going on, after Cole finally shatters the doll, awakening something else within the house. The truth is, there is nothing supernatural happening, as suddenly the real adult Brahms arrives with his mighty chest hair, having been living in the fucking walls this entire time. This is a twist that would make M. Night Shyamalan cream himself. The Heelshires do subtly allude to Brahms always being there, so it wasn't an impossibility, but you have to really think outside the box given the film indirectly maintains its twist with its generic and unambitious delivery. In the moment, it's a genuinely powerful payoff, but once the dust has settled after he kills Joel and a Scooby-Doo chase ensues, it's obviously coming from a very contrived place. Brahms is basically a psychopath who murdered another child when he was young, and the fire was what I think a hoax concocted by the Heelshires to protect their son by faking his death, reinforced by them explicitly choosing Greta to be his mate before they offed themselves. The whole family was more or less messed up, and the film ends with Greta killing Brahms, only for a sequel bait ending to reveal the doll being repaired. Now, 4 years later, along came the sequel, which you'd think would be pointless given we know the twist, but oh, you haven't seen anything yet. It manages to get even more ridiculous. Just so I can get to the point, while the original gets props for being an okay if tedious atmospheric chiller, the sequel is an utterly soulless slog to sit through. This time, oh my god, would you believe it, we're dealing with the theme of trauma again, as the setup of the story sees a mother and son called Lisa and Jude get terrorized by two masked burglars, prompting the father Sean to relocate them to a country home close to the Heelshire Manor. While it does give the film another emotional stake, it's presented as more hollow than the doll itself, which is mysteriously discovered by Jude, buried but fully repaired outside the Heelshire Manor. The unique thing established about Jude's character is that since the ordeal, he's remained mute, and ends up trying to communicate to his parents that the doll needs to be cared for in the same way Greta was told. But despite this being a big plot point that they make a fairly noticeable deal about, it just sort of drops this without much acknowledgement other than, Jude can talk again, oh my god, isn't it a miracle? The doll still has that uncanny presence, but they really oversell it this time by actually showing you the doll physically move when nobody is looking, cheapened further by replacing the nightmares Greta had about the doll to Lisa having nightmares about the burglars. Now, you're probably asking yourself, wasn't it alluded to in the first film that nothing supernatural was happening? Well, the sequel kinda retcons this by revealing that yes, the doll is in fact supernatural this time, as it tries to influence Jude to the point he starts dressing depressing like it, which is funnier than it has any right to be. At the same time, however, it actually addresses the question from the original of how the doll moves about. Discovering that Brahms is real makes you assume he's the one moving the doll about when nobody is looking, but that doesn't make any practical sense when you think about it. Whereas in the sequel, we're introduced to new insights from the form of another exposition-dumping character called Joseph, played by Ralph Ineson, whose mere existence in the film makes it much more tolerable. He's a nothing character until the climax, simply existing to be brooding and delivering all the same information you learn in the original, including the fact that Greta did kill Brahms, but no. We know Brahms is alive because we saw him remake the doll at the end of the first movie. But this movie likes to throw you with a fucking curveball. Honestly, this goes beyond Shyamalan. This is a Saw-level plot twist, in that it's so impressively preposterous and yet fits perfectly into place. After the doll nearly kills Sean's friend's asshole kid, Sean learns from some random fucking guy in a hospital waiting room while Lisa does so through Google that the doll was passed through a lineage of owners who each fell victim to the child who inherited it. In other words, it takes this supernatural plot point from Sinister, in that the doll is cursed to make the owning child a violent psychopath, which was the case when Brahms then killed a girl when he was young, and now the same thing is happening to Jude. Joseph is then revealed to be the one who repaired the doll, having been possessed into following its orders and ensuring it found a new owner after Brahms died. Now, if you're still with me, I will say it does recontextualize Brahms as a victim to the doll's evil influence than him just being some evil child at birth, but it actually makes it less scarier than it just being the banality of evil. Sean and Lisa then rescue Jude by trying to destroy the doll, which turns into this weird CG monster abomination thing that then kills Joseph, and the family decides to fuck off back to London where they were, because to hell with the countryside, they'd rather take their chances with burglars. Oh, I guess they've overcome their trauma, I don't give a shit. The movie then obviously has the balls to set up another sequel by implanting the curse in Brahms' mask, but that's not going to happen because this movie died to death both critically and commercially. William Brent Bell really seems to have passion for this idea because he's clearly convinced there's something to this by apparently trying to get this to be a rounded off trilogy by bringing the real Brahms back into the equation. The thing is, however, if this were a Blumhouse product, Bell would probably get exactly what he wanted, because regardless of quality, there's clearly a sizable market for these types of movies, yet there is no way in hell he would be getting $10 million a pop to make another one of these things. This video is sponsored by Geology. So, M. Night Shyamalan dropped a new film this year called Knock at the Cabin, based on the book Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay, which you may not be aware of because, like with Old in 2021, Shyamalan was marketed as a solo visionary, somewhat undermining the roots of his inspirations. That said, the guy has an undeniably fascinating allure to him that leaves me morbidly curious to see what he does with his weird, uncanny storytelling style. I appreciate his unfiltered ambitions to be different, more so than his attitude, because just as I think he's going to hit us with something potentially unique and thought-provoking after a compelling setup, he's usually let down by his own hubris and inability to scrutinize his own creations. Look, I've said my piece on him before, so I'll be quick. The gist of my feelings is that he just tries way too hard to force profoundness and intelligence instead of just simply letting the story and characters emotionally speak for themselves. Because when he does step back and lets his movies breathe, they can be really good, as proven with The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, and even Signs, for as polarizing as it is. However, in my opinion, I feel his turning point from genuinely emotive storyteller to self-branded auteur genius in need of validation is most prominently displayed in 2004's The Village. Set in 19th century Pennsylvania, The Village tells the story of an isolated, close-knit community, bound to their village by a mysterious threat lurking within the surrounding forest, known as Those We Don't Speak Of. The villagers are forbidden from ever entering the forest, with the elders adamantly seeking to maintain peace, order, and prosperity despite their limited resources and lack of communication with the outside world. However, one day, a young, timid, disillusioned villager called Lucius requests permission to seek out one of the towns beyond the forest in a bid to find medicine after the death of one of the elder's children. Yet, after being denied, he briefly breaches the forest in a moment of defiance, only to be spotted by one of the creatures, causing them to attack the town and leave warnings in the form of bloody red door markings and murdered livestock, scaring the villagers to stay precisely where they are and never leave. Until the end, we never see what lies beyond the forest. We're told by the elders that the towns are nothing more than sinful cesspits of evil and corruption, let alone the dangerous creatures that live right outside their doorstep. It's a legitimately eerie setup that eventually unravels into one of Shyamalan's trademark bonkers plot twists that with better writing could have made for a truly heartbreaking and provocative payoff when you take into account the delivery of its main theme of grief. The thing is, I would honestly go as far as to say that this is by far Shyamalan's best twist ending, because despite what you think of his ludicrous ideas, it is genuinely clever at recontextualizing our understanding of what the true purpose of this village ultimately is. That said, it's worth bearing in mind before anyone claims originality, the main twist was accused, and rightfully so, of being lifted straight out of a 1996 young adult novel called Running Out of Time, so it kind of puts a dent in the whole, damn, maybe Shyamalan does seriously think outside the box. Obviously, I won't spoil the big surprise until later in the video, but the reason I'm covering The Village is that I wanted to reassess my feelings towards it, considering I haven't seen it in about 15 years, where back then, I'll admit, the movie went right over my head. As always, please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Believe it or not, I actually do read them. Leave a cheeky wee like and subscribe. And now, here are a few words from this video's sponsor, Geologie. I know what you're thinking. You see my big, beautiful face in my videos and on social media, and you ask, Ryan, how do you do it? And I'll tell you this, in recent weeks, a big part of that has been down to Geologie, a 16-time award-winning skin, hair, and body care company recognized in Men's Health, GQ, Spy, Esquire, and Ask Men grooming awards. Geologie creates simple and effective skincare and hair care routines customized just for you, using products built around powerful ingredients trusted by dermatologists, with easily accessible descriptions on what each product contains available on their website. Until now, I have never had a skincare routine, but since October, I've been doing a lot more public-facing work and events, and realized a look of withering exhaustion and caffeine-fueled sleepless nights wasn't exactly the warmest appearance to greet someone with. With Geologie, all I did was answer a quick quiz about my skin and goals, and they sent me out a simple morning and night routine, specifically to tackle acne, oily skin, and dark under eyes, whilst handling my infamously sensitive skin that gets easily irritable. Simply put, it's a nice, refreshing way to reinvigorate myself in the morning instead of running straight for the coffee machine, as I use their exfoliating face wash followed by a smooth, hydrating tone control cream, and end with a soft, delicate eye cream that includes just a cheeky little bit of caffeine to give my eyes a boost. With over 6,000 5-star reviews, right now you can use my code Ryan70 to get an insanely exclusive 70% off their award-winning skincare trial set, and on top of that, they're also giving you an exclusive bonus offer on one of their brand new skin, hair, and body products of your choice when you add it to your trial. So, like with most Shyamalan reevaluations, I've heard many arguments that The Village ranks as probably his most misunderstood film, particularly regarding the romantic tale that dominates most of the story's first and second act. It's one of those situations where people will say it was unfairly mismarketed as a horror movie about a village tormented by monsters, when in fact it might have received a better reception had people set the right expectations, that it predominantly focused on characters within the village, but I'm going to disagree with that. It reminded me of the public reception towards The Witch, where most general audiences didn't like it because it leaned heavily on period piece more so than horror. However, while I like The Witch personally, just because it's less genre and more drama, doesn't necessarily elevate it into a better film. While expectations factor hugely into our feelings, hence why I wasn't the biggest fan of Barbarian, but we'll deal with that next week, the monster stuff is ultimately its most crucial component as it fundamentally carries the central mystery of the village. The love triangle between the introverted Lucius, the blind daughter of the chief elder called Ivy, and an intellectually disabled man called Noah doesn't contribute a hell of a lot to our eventual understanding of what is actually going on. It doesn't help that the movie fails to fully invite us into its world to get intimately familiar with the characters and their struggles, resulting in them feeling largely underdeveloped and thus less sympathetic when we're forced to sit through their meandering affairs.
I love you, Lucius.
The way I see it, The Village felt like I was backed into a corner as certain characters aimlessly talked about their boring existence, while I was desperately distracted looking over their shoulder, longing to figure out what the hell was going on in the forest. Whether you like it or not, the horror conceit is its unique selling point, and to divert attention away from it for so long takes time away from better addressing the theme of grief that opens the film. There is a deep-seated secret planted early on where Lucius questions if the elders are hiding something from the villagers, given their ambiguous assertion about not leaving the village because of how seemingly dangerous and evil this unseen outside world is. There's a palpable tension that something isn't quite right. There's a delicate, softly beautiful tone set by composer James Newton Howard, which rightfully received an Academy Award nomination, that's shadowed by a potent melancholy. Loneliness and discontent loom over the village, insinuating this isn't the peaceful prosperity we and the villagers are led to believe. The exposition says the village was built as a beacon of hope and harmonious sanctuary, but the visual style and perpetual reminder of the forest's inhabitants indicates otherwise. Director of photography Roger Deakins digs into his Edward Hopper painterly influence to heighten that forlorn and alienated realism through distinct mid and long shot composition and an absence of colour, bar an alarming red, to convey a sense of oppression mixed with the cold autumn setting. It's so stylistically subdued, making it all the more believable, especially when the reality begins to take shape. What's done so immaculately well is conveying the villagers' perpetual ignorance. They constantly turn a blind eye away from troubles because, after all, the village is said to be perfect. Why should we question that? They effectively force a lie upon themselves to believe this is the only real place where goodness and purity can prosper, but faith and unquestioned acceptance to what they're told breeds negative consequences. There were essentially two theories building up in my head. The outside world was a post-apocalyptic wasteland, and the village truly was the only sanctuary left, akin to the ambiguity in 10 Cloverfield Lane, or what we're witnessing is a cult indicative of the likes of Jonestown, where the elders rule through fear under the illusion it's for the greater good of the people. However, to go any further involves going into spoilers, obviously, so brace yourself. Firstly, let's deal with the romance stuff, because there honestly isn't much to it. Alright, so Ivy loves Lucius, but Lucius is emotionally absent because he's dealing with some personal problems. But then OMG, would you believe it, Ivy's sister Kitty also loves Lucius and tries to profess her love to him only to be faced with crippling rejection, but it's okay, she quickly gets over it and later ends up in some arranged marriage with some other guy who recently wrote and directed a really heartbreaking film called Mass that I highly recommend. Finally, you have Noah, an intellectually disabled man who loves Ivy and gets jealous at Lucius, who's like, oh hey, hold on a minute, I didn't agree to anything here. But Noah, in a fit of rage, fucking stabs Lucius, prompting his arrest, as the elders are forced to acknowledge that the village is just as exposed to corruption as the towns they hide away from. You got all that? At times, it feels like Shyamalan wants to write a William Faulkner novel or produce some meta-American folktale about God-fearing, superstitious, family-oriented communities, but without any sincere emotional attachment to the material or adding any substance to it. It ultimately ends up being just a contrived route back to Lucius's desire to leave the village to obtain medicine, but switching the role to Evie, who obtains permission from her father after Lucius's stabbing because he admires Lucius's unique fearlessness towards what lies beyond the forest, unlike the rest of the village who are socialized into cowardice. However, when all is explained, the logic just doesn't completely add up, because Ivy's father, Chief Elder Walker, is the very person who created this culture of fear. Before Ivy ventures off, he confides in her that the creatures are in fact not real. They're simply costumes used by the elders to scare people from leaving the village for reasons I'll get to shortly. By the way, may I say, they are some genuinely sinister costumes. I mean, the design is basically Man-Bear-Pig, but they have a mighty presence on the few occasions we see them. Although, the significant problem with learning that they're fake before Evie commences her journey makes her later fight with one of them fall completely flat on its face. I understand the reasoning Walker shows her they're fake is so she isn't afraid while in the forest, but he also asks her to maintain the secrecy so the villagers don't leave, yet would it not be easier just to maintain it if he didn't tell her and ask the costume wearer to ignore her because she's blind, so it's not like she's going to notice? It seems like a massive oversight. By not knowing, it would make her encounter with the mysterious attacker more effective because we would be assuming it's real only to be shocked to discover it was actually Noah wearing the costume after he escaped from detention after stabbing Lucius. I mean, it's clearly somewhat aware of this because it does try to cheat by implying that Walker based the creature on folklore, but in that case, wouldn't it not be more effective to reveal the creature to be real, because it would be like a twist within a twist, like Twistception kind of shit. It would be like that episode of The Simpsons where Homer is constantly attacked by a guy in a Grumple costume, only for it to piss green blood when Homer beats it in a bar fight.
What the hell is this thing?
Anyway, the biggest twist comes when Ivy emerges from the forest to discover the film is actually set in the fucking present day, with the village being located deep within a private wildlife preserve owned by Elder Walker's family's estate, who even paid the government to make the area a no-fly zone so that the villagers never know the true reality of their world. In the exact words of the film, what we're watching is a total farce. In fact, Shyamalan's awkward, uncanny style indirectly helps reinforce the idea that the village is some sort of inorganic artificial roleplay. It is genuinely a cult. The ulterior motive for sending Evie for the medicine is because she won't know anything is different since she's blind, but Walker is still gambling on Evie never revealing the secret of the creatures, and when Lucius is healed, isn't he not going to just continue to defy the rules anyway? I mean, before he's stabbed, he's already calling their bluff. They would be better just letting Noah finish the job and the whole thing would be a more shocking outcome. In fact, what if Lucius fought back against the creature and overcame it? Like Walker said, he's fearless, so he's the most capable of completely exposing the whole operation, so it's actually in their favor to let Lucius die. Considering the cult has existed since the 70s, it's a really fucking weird time for Walker to grow a conscience. I know we talk about plot holes that aren't really plot holes, but this is a gaping crater of contrived logic. It could be justified as Walker finally seeing the hope he and the elders have turned their back on after many years, but it doesn't explore the morality behind them. In the end, everything is inconsequential. We seemingly go back to blind obedience without the characters experiencing any real change. It defeats the message the film is seemingly built on. The village was essentially created as a coping mechanism by the elders who each had lost faith in humanity after suffering from traumatic experiences such as crime placed upon themselves or those they loved. They are terrified, broken people who met in grief counseling, but instead of trying to deal with their problems in a healthy way, Walker, as an American professor, suggested returning to the days of their ancestors and living a Puritan life away from from the harsh, cruel outside world. As such, they cultivated a community based on fear, grievance, and ignorance, rather on hope, prosperity, and salvation. It's all summarized in one hypocritical insight. Walker tells Ivy that his father was corrupted by greed, but at the end of the day, it's the very same greed that allowed this village to even exist. As you can see, there are many great ideas in here, but Shyamalan implements them without much cohesion or afterthought. A lot of my interpretation comes down to piecing together what I think he's trying to say, because its point is never effectively communicated. It's trying to get across a lot of stuff, making up for what is quantity over quality. Do I think we misunderstood it? No, I think we get it. It just doesn't make it all that good when we do. So, until next time, stay safe, stay away from the village, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.
Mùi cơ thể có cản bước thành công. X-Men Purpose Legend khử mùi khô thoáng với hương gió biển thanh mát. Tự tin.
This video is sponsored by Raycon. Hey, before we begin, I want to give a shout out to Cool Channel Dreadtube, who beat me to the punch on this specific topic months ago. After making my video, I came across their essay, which I normally try to avoid when covering similar topics, that I feel dives even deeper into concepts I cover based on the book that establishes the film's thesis, The Gift of Fear, so I highly recommend you give them a watch if you enjoyed this topic and want to learn more. I've left a link in the description box below, and I want to give a wholehearted thank you to them for giving me the blessing to release this video. For the most part, Barbarian is a cleverly made film. While I personally don't think it sticks the landing in its third and final act, I want to talk about what I think the film does so impeccably well, and that's character. Now, do keep in mind we are jumping into spoilers fairly quickly, so you've been warned from the get-go. Also, you might hear a few audio changes throughout. That's because I ended up rewriting and expanding on the video because I wasn't happy with the original outcome, but anyway. As a brief summary, the first act of Barbarian tells the story of Tess, a young professional attending a job interview in Detroit, where she discovers she's double booked into the same Airbnb as another stranger called Keith. They exchange tense, awkward pleasantries with a massive asterisk and attempt to find a reasonable compromise, only for them to later discover a hidden passage in the basement that leads to a dark labyrinth of tunnels that house something truly sinister. The second act introduces us to AJ, a Hollywood actor accused of committing the evil R in the case of YouTube censorship, who returns to said Airbnb, which he happens to own, in a bid to liquidate the asset to pay for his legal costs. Eventually, in Act 3, the characters intercept each other as they try to survive, while learning about the historical horror buried deep within the house. The film is essentially one part social thriller and the other part creature feature, the former being its most unique and enticing element, even eliciting borderline Hitchcockian vibes, while the latter has this misplaced French extremity-esque shock factor that left me deeply conflicted. The thing is, Barbarian is better treated as a character study than simply a traditional narrative. It takes several distinct perspectives and subtly shows their personal attitudes, behaviours and beliefs towards tense, dangerous and even just awkward situations, with the scenes of each character entering the mysterious basement at separate times, perfectly consolidating their characters. This is most noticeable through Tess and AJ, as we get extended scenes focusing on their distinct attitudes towards the overtly shady and obviously dangerous looking basement, but we'll come back to that shortly once we've established the full context of the story. In an interview with writer-director Zach Krager, the movie spawned from a 30-minute treatment script based on security specialist Gavin de Becker's self-help book The Gift of Fear, Survival Signals That Protect Us from Violence. The book is equal parts insightful as it is deeply harrowing, with the framing focusing around a real victim who intuitively sensed danger from a man claiming to be a helpful neighbour, but didn't associate his image and behaviour with that of an attacker. In the most simplistic sense, you'll see this recurring theme throughout both the film and de Becker's book about looks being deceiving, and how our natural survival instincts signal important information we can't always outwardly see. In de Becker's words, the book isn't about assuming every individual is up to nefarious means, it's about being able to rationalize your instincts and know when to act upon them. Thus, instead of living in fear, you react better to what is actually happening as opposed to what could happen. In the first act of Barbarian, we see this play out entirely through Tess's eyes, as she shows an acute awareness and reading of her surroundings. After arriving at the Airbnb, her reaction to Keith is understandably defensive and cautious. She's careful not to make herself vulnerable as she assesses the uncertainty of the situation, taking in the fact that she's alone in an unfamiliar setting with a mysterious man in the dead of night, even wisely photographing Keith's ID when alone in the bedroom in case something were to transpire. Keith, on the other hand, grows increasingly self-conscious in his hyper-awareness of how the situation might look. Again, he's a tall, strong-looking dude in an empty house alone with a woman he doesn't know. There's a social etiquette at play, let's say, where he doesn't want to give off the wrong vibe while inadvertently calling attention to it in his efforts to diffuse the tension that exists. The first key signal Tess elicits is when she declines Keith's seemingly polite offer to make her tea, but he makes it anyway, suggesting he could have drugged it, or he could have also just tried too hard to be nice, despite ignoring her clear decline. This is later followed up when Keith decides to open a bottle of wine, but waits until Tess is in the room so she can see he has not tampered with it. On the one hand, he seems to be showing respect and forethought, but on the other, he's potentially pushing his boundaries by introducing alcohol into an uncertain situation. Now, of course, some will rebuke that I'm overthinking a simple situation, but as de Becker explains in his book, it's a mentality that naturally triggers in situations where we certainly feel a lack of safety or control. The point is, there are so many nuances at play in how you choose to interpret the interaction, because the truth is, while they do get to know each other on a more intimate level, they never stop being strangers. Keith in particular appears sincere thanks to Bill Skarsgård's immense and delicate charisma, but much like how the house seems so perfect in a neighbourhood we discover is ravaged by dilapidation, eventually mirroring the discoveries of certain characters, underneath the surface we can never see the true intent of anyone. In fact, taking into account Skarsgård's most prolific performance was playing a stalking, child-murdering clown, playing against somewhat of a type was a brilliant casting decision. In de Becker's words, there are 7 tactics used by perpetrators that, in a different light, can change how we evaluate the uncertainty of Keith's character. You have force teaming, which sees Keith collectively tie them equally into the same tense situation through rapport, charm and niceness being used as a verb instead of a trait, overselling specific details to make Tess forget situational context, typecasting, which is labeling the victim in an insulting manner to invite defense, which we see in Keith pointing out Tess to be weak and vulnerable, loan sharking, where Keith shows too much insistence to be helpful as gentlemanly as it may seem, also further making Tess seem dependent on him, the unsolicited promise, which comes later when he goes to investigate the basement but asks her to wait so they can leave together, and the last one clear through the T, discounting the word no. While Keith absolutely appears genuine and is ultimately proven to be so, quoting de Becker, chivalry can be dangerous if insisted upon given the circumstances. Again, we cannot truly predict anyone's behaviour, and through Tess's eyes, he is still ultimately a stranger. To conclude this before we move on to the basement, one of De Becker's points in his chapter Imperfect Strangers discusses how some people operate without listening to their consciences or caring about the welfare of others, which perfectly summarizes AJ's character, as we'll come to see later. But just as equally, others operate the opposite way, and so part of our intuition and assessment comes from empathizing with the person we're with to see it from their perspective. The point isn't to drop your guard, it's actually to inform and reinforce it, enter an alliance with the self, as De Becker calls it, and in turn better gauge your judgment as intelligently as Tess does. So, this leads us to the basement, where Tess discovers a secret door that leads to a room clearly designed to imprison someone with sinister intent, like snuff film purposes, prompting her to tell Keith, who decides to investigate it for himself. We never see him enter the hidden basement, but his curiosity to investigate without caution instead of noping the hell out of there like Tess does, tells us a lot about his character and his demeanor towards these types of situations. Personally, given my anxious disposition, I would be like Tess, and definitely not go down there. I'm the kind of person that, in unfamiliar spaces, likes to know where the exit is in case I need to bail for whatever reason. That said, I do know people who would have absolutely no problem going down there without questioning their safety because, as De Becker even puts it in his book, some people, mostly us dudes, just go through life without ever thinking anything bad will happen to them. When Tess hears Keith's screams and reluctantly decides to help, the movie makes entering the basement a gruelingly uncomfortable watch. We enter from an empathetic point of view and witness the unknowingness unfold firsthand through Tess's eyes. Before entering, there's a sense of voyeurism to the camera lurking around her that's then pressed close to her when she enters the basement to convey both claustrophobia and the emotional attachment we have for her character and safety, with subtle heartbeats intensifying both our shared fear and anxiety for what's to come. You can palpably feel the energy pulling you back upstairs. You want to leave, but what maintains Tess's desperate descent is the fact we've built a rapport with Keith that he effectively radiates a sense of companionship in this lonely, scary place. This, of course, ends with a harrowing crescendo when an injured Keith stumbles out of the darkness, only to be barbarically murdered by a multi-generational inbred naked lady who is the product of decades of abusive incest. Yeah, this will all make sense later. However, you know what makes sense now? This video sponsor, Raycon. Whether you're looking for a pair of everyday earbuds, low latency gaming headphones, or a speaker with a battery that will last all night at your next party, Raycon's got you covered. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you'll know I use Raycon earbuds on a daily basis, thanks to their simple, accessible features and genuinely excellent sound quality. With 3 customizable sound profiles that cater to what I'm listening to, Raycons are perfect for helping me de-stress after a long day of making videos, as I use balanced sound when watching suspenseful films like Prisoners, pure sound when listening to the Creepy Magnus Archives podcast, thank you to those who recently recommended it, and just the other day I was reading the script for the Ghost Story 222 and threw on bass sound while listening to some spooky ambience to really heighten the effect. Particularly these last few weeks, I've had an influx of work calls, and instead of relying on my built-in grainy laptop mic, Raycons provide vividly clear voice quality, and with only a few taps of the earbud, Raycon reduces the absolute hassle of bulky headsets and awkward cables, and just makes my whole work process easier and engaging. With over 50,000 5-star reviews, a free return guarantee, and starting at half the price of other premium audio brands, if you're ready to buy something small with a big impact and help support my channel, simply click the link in the description box below or go to buyraycon.com/Ryan to get 15% off your Raycon purchase. Okay, so where was I? Oh yes, following this disturbing reveal, the movie switches to the perspective of the happy-go-lucky AJ, who's met with accusations of assault from a former co-star, causing his television pilot to be cancelled and his management to cut ties with him, with potential criminal charges pending. During this, we're still dwelling on the shock of Keith's death and Tess's uncertain fate, while slowly adjusting ourselves to a boisterous character that feels straight out of Always Sunny in Philadelphia. The major contrasting point of his character is that he painfully lacks in both self-awareness and self-reflection and is in denial of his behaviour. Hell, the movie even later tries to give him a fake redemption arc, where in a moment of vulnerability he acknowledges his terrible behaviour, only to immediately regress back into it because he's the hero of his own narrative. When AJ enters the basement, the delivery is completely different. Like Keith, he overlooks the signs of danger to fulfill his own desires, which in this case is the excitement of being able to claim more square footage on his property, increasing its value thanks to a murder sex dungeon he doesn't seem to notice.
Yeah, bitch.
As he follows the dark, ominous tunnels with a tape measure, the camera work is slightly less claustrophobic compared to Tess, reflecting his utter lack of fear and contemplation for what this place is, which, to be honest, besides his shitness, I know people who would have no quarrels assessing the square footage of a mysterious basement if it was on their property. An interesting artistic choice between the mirroring between Tess and AJ's experience is the choice of lighting. Tess uses a white LED on her phone, giving off this cool yet bright alerting exposure, which for me is more terrifying and dramatically impacts the presentation, more so than the orange warm isolated beam of AJ's torch, which I think further reflects his confident energy. It also adapts the atmosphere somewhat, as we've grown a sense of familiarity by this point. With the main ambiguity gone, we build a certain confidence in our expectations. Obviously, this is quickly lost when the woman attacks AJ, reverting the camera work back to the claustrophobia conveyed with Tess. Soon, AJ ends up trapped in a cage with Tess, who's apparently been down here for 2 weeks, and before their escape commences, we switch to basement entry number 3 from the perspective of the film's actual villain. Now, before we get into that, let's address the elephant in the room, the multi-generational inbred naked lady who's the product of decades of abusive incest. So I guess my main problem with Barbarian is that it kinda wants to have its cake and eat it, in that it's trying to be this virtuous, socially conscious look at power dynamics and human interaction, and also be a bit of a B-movie that comes at the expense of its true victim, the multi-generational inbred naked lady. Look, I get the premise of the film's theme is that looks can be deceiving, that we can't know the true intent of anyone's character, such as when Tess is seemingly harassed by a homeless man only for it later to show he was trying to warn her, and then of course you have all of Keith's behaviour, but in the context of its big reveal, it comes off to me that they're trying to treat the victim of abuse as a misunderstood monster, as it were, which I wouldn't have a problem with if it didn't hammer up so much in the final 15 minutes when she kills AJ and the homeless man before being shot dead by Tess, almost kinda cynically. It seems to undermine its own commentary by robbing its biggest victim of justice, which yes, tragically happens in real life, but the tone doesn't portray that. It reads to me as if the first 2 acts understood the thematic assignment, but the final act doesn't know how to close it off in a meaningful way. Maybe I'm just bitter because the insane Twitter hype made me set unrealistically high expectations and thus made me more critical than usual, but anyway I look at it, the ending and the big reveal itself just did not work for me. Anyway, back to the grotesqueness of man. We flash back to the 1980s, where we see the neighborhood in a prosperous sitcom-esque form, with the house occupied by a despicable man called Frank, the real monster of the film. It's an uncomfortably uncanny scene, as its vivid yet artificially idealistic art direction contrasts immensely with what we just saw, as keeping with the theme of uncertain and false appearances, Frank is shown to hide behind a quiet demeanor that makes him seemingly difficult to read. By this point, despite the fact we know he's evil, his neighbors just treat him as shy and introverted, yet we get a great feel for what his character truly is with the way the camera shadows behind him with a similar claustrophobia as before, which is made even more jarringly noticeable in the wider spacious setting. There's subtle positioning to his character within the frame that make him appear domineering over others, with his arrival at a future victim's house conveyed with an emotional coldness as if he's calculated to cause nothing but harm. Like with OG Michael Myers, he looks and feels like a force of evil. In such a short scene, we learn everything about his character purely through presence, so when it comes time to enter the basement once again, instead of following him, the camera waits anxiously by the door, too terrified to witness the horrors within. We echo the same instincts as Tess. We can sense it, feel it, we know he's up to something diabolical without ever having to see it. Back in the present scenario, both characters eventually escape, with AJ coming face to face with a frail, sickly Frank on his deathbed. It's a compelling